So I want to start by telling you just a little of my history, and then you'll, when I'm talking about marketing or post-harvest handling or food safety, you'll have it in context. And I really want to start with what is a farm and a definition for what is the farm. Because for me, that drives a lot of my marketing and farm management decisions. And every farm really has to be every farm is a different synthesis of that land, people, and business. So the decisions that you make every day are going to be unique to your farm. And I first started thinking about this in 1989. I was farming with my husband on land that was in his family for 5 generations. He took over the family land in 1973. It was land that he had grown up on, land that he knew very intimately. It was 120 acres, about 35 acres were tillable, and the rest of the land was still in intact ecosystems. It never had really been taken out of them. So I joined him in 1985, and as a young woman farming on an organic farm, I actually thought farming was really easy because, you know, we put the plants in the ground and then we weeded them and then we harvested them. And we really didn't have pest or disease issues. So I thought, I don't get what the big deal is. This is not that hard to manage our pests and disease. But I didn't know what ecosystem services were or biological diversity. I just didn't know those phrases, and I didn't know that that's what was happening. And that's why we didn't have pests and diseases, is because we were in this really intact landscape, and our fields were just these little fields tucked in amongst a lot of diversity. We had 40 acres of oaks. Every single field had fruit all around it, berries, wild apples. There were always flowers and forbs blooming. There was bunch grasses, and these things were just here from before the settlers broke the land. They hadn't been taken off of this piece of land. So that was my farming situation. We managed our fertility by rotating our crops and growing soil building crops. Our pests and diseases, as I said, basically managed themselves. And we had a roadside stand right there on the farm. And then we also sold wholesale into restaurants. And we had young kids, and you know, if any of you have young children on a vegetable farm, I've not been to one yet where the kids aren't engaged, you know, because they're right there with their parents doing what their parents are doing. So they knew who they were, what we valued. They had relationships with our customers. They were right there in the middle of all of that. And it was really where they saw the life process, where they got in touch with what was for them as young children a spiritual relationship with that land. But there was one problem. And that was that land, the city of Egan, which we were in, we're called the Gardens of Egan, they didn't leave any land zoned for agriculture. So the day came when 20 of the 120 acres was condemned for a school. And then you really can't say no to school. My husband and I didn't own the land. We owned 1 acre. And the land was owned by his aunts. And then Sewer and Water had to cross the rest of the land to serve the school. And so because the land then has access to sewer and water, it is more valuable because it can be developed. And so there are sewer and water assessments, so the land has to help pay for that sewer and water. And you know, you don't have to pay those assessments until the land is developed, until it's sold. But you know, never ever is a fairy tale, and a very long time, and it's really not reality. And those assessments had 11% interest against them. So in 7 years, $500,000 becomes $1 million. In another 7, it's $2 million, then $4 million. And families have to make really difficult decisions about what to do. This is not an unusual story. It has happened in every town in this country to tens of thousands of farms and farmers. So the land was sold. They made the decision to sell. Oftentimes there's multiple family members who want different things. What happened next really was the biggest lesson of my life, because they did the rest of the development over a period of 4 years, and we were allowed to then rent from the developer the land that wasn't yet developed until they got to that portion. But it meant that we were farming land immediately adjacent to land that had had all life removed. They came in with bulldozers. They took every tree, every bush, every blade of grass. So all of that habitat that was housing all sorts of insects and species that were really beneficial to our farming systems was gone, and all that life left. So there we were farming on land. I should have put a picture in here for you, but we were farming on land that was immediately adjacent to bulldozers. I mean, adjacent, like the bulldozers are here and the broccoli plant was here. And we experienced a complete ecological collapse. We couldn't grow our crops. The pests and disease were completely overran us. When it would rain, there was no life for the water to take the water in. So it would just run and take soil with it and bury our crops. It was impossible. So I went from this naive young woman who thought, wow, farming is just so easy. You just put the plant in, then you pick it and you weed it, like, wow, it's easy, to realizing how utterly dependent we are on the ecosystem and nature for everything in our lives. So it profoundly affected me. And during that period of time, we ended up renting on 18 different properties to have enough land to farm until we could buy a new farm. We were certified organic, so once we did buy a new farm, we had to transition it to organic. So that took another 36 months. So we ended up on so many properties because we couldn't find large pieces of land that we could certify. We could find 2 acres here that someone had sort of not used for a while, and we could certify that. And 18 properties with a 30-mile radius, a management nightmare, just to get enough land to continue the business as it was. And during that process, I said to myself this question: what is a farm? What is a farm? You know, here I am. Am I a farmer? Am I not a farmer? I looked it up in the dictionary, and I came up with it. I saw the definition was attractive land suitable for agricultural purposes. I was like, well, no, that's not the definition of farming. They got this all wrong. And I really started thinking about it, and I ended up with my definition, which is a farm is a synthesis of the land, the people, and the business. That each of those components really brings a different thing, and every farm is different. So that the land that you're on, the type of soil it is, the topography, whether it's a southern slope or a northern slope, what other species are on it, what climate exists in, that contributes its component of this synthesis of the land, the people, and the business. The people bring their passions, their strengths, their weaknesses, their previous experiences. If you were a bookkeeper before you became a farmer, you bring that skill with you. The business, you know, it's very affected by the climate it's in. My business market is very different than your business market. It brings the goodwill that the farm has generated. So all of these different components synthesized together, to me, is what makes a farm. And to be successful as a farm, you really want to find the strength and this consolidation that your farm synthesis is, so that you can maximize all of those strengths. So every one of your farms should be different and asking these questions that they have to face in the market from the perspective of who you are as a farm. And that's how I'm going to present today, is to try to help you really recognize what's unique and strength about your farm and build your markets upon that. So we'll talk about marketing first. We'll talk some about packing, because this workshop was intended to focus on the wholesale needs, although the non-wholesale needs will also be very addressed. But when we talk about packing, we'll talk a little bit about wholesale packing. And then we'll talk about post-harvest handling. I've been asked to have an emphasis on food safety. So when we're talking about the post-harvest handling, I'll be bringing the food safety practice integrated into the post-harvest practices, because food safety, it's not this other thing that you do. You know, it's not just this document you write and then you go over here and do food safety. Food safety is right here in the farm while you're practicing and doing all those things that you do on your farm. It really has to be integrated into your everyday activities. So I'm going to present it to you integrated into talking about those everyday activities. And then we'll spend some time looking at tools that are available that you can use to write a food safety plan and to assess your food safety systems. And we'll take a little tour of some pack sheds. And you get to, it's kind of like you'll get to visit some other farms and see their operations, and hopefully that'll be helpful for you in your own. So as you go through your farming years, you know, Martin and I, every single year, we would evaluate. We'd sit down in the middle of winter. Being vegetable farmers, we had seasonal lives. So we would do a late November, early December annual evaluation. And we were a little extreme. I have a great chapter in my book about it, because we would literally quit farming every year. We said, just because we own a farm and we have a successful business doesn't mean we have to be farmers. We wanted to really be farmers because we wanted to be farmers. So it was a silly exercise, but it worked really well for us. And we would officially quit. We'd shake each other's hand and say, thanks, it was great farming with you, and great run there, and let's think about what we want to do with our lives. And so we would quit for a week, and it was like illegal to talk about the weather. You couldn't do anything about farming that whole week. We cheated a lot, actually. But that was sort of what we pretended we were doing, and we basically played for a week. which farmers don't seem to do a whole lot of in season, so it's a great way to keep your relationship healthy. And then we would spend the next week really evaluating our farm and where we wanted to go and asking ourselves a lot of questions, you know. If we could live the perfect lives and run the perfect farm, what would it look like? And we would look at what we were doing, you know, at the present time. What's going well? What's not going so well? What do we need to do? What do we want our lives to look like? And what do we change about our farm business to get our lives to look like that? A lot of questions about balance. How many of you vegetable farmers or any kind of farmers feel that you have achieved balance between your farm and your personal life? Come on, get those arms up there. Nobody's waving there. Don't you want to exercise, you know? Well, it was always our goal. I wouldn't say we ever actually accomplished it. I think it's something you strive for. I don't know if you ever really get there, but that was part of that week-long evaluation process, and we really looked at our markets. So we wanted our markets to serve us and our farm. And so the farm changed a lot over the years, and you know that when Martin started in 1973, he sold at farmers markets, and it was good for him as a starting person, but it very quickly became not good because it was really a buyer's market at that point in 1973, and he wasn't able to get good prices. We had Twin Cities food co-ops starting around the same time in the early 70s, and so when they started, they were really about cheap food for the people, and they had an ideology about moving food into the people's hands and away from the corporation, but they really weren't into organic. And he was starting at the same time. They were actually going to the farmers markets to buy the food co-ops, and that's how he met them. And so they kind of grew up together. He started a delivery route going to those stores and selling to them wholesale and educated them about organic, and the food co-ops and him kind of grew up at the same time, influencing each other. So when I joined him in 1985, his main business was the food co-ops in the Twin Cities, and then we also had a roadside stand right there on our farm. And you know, in the 70s and 80s, people didn't know what organic was. They didn't even know how to spell it. They spelled it organitic or organic, and they just put a T on the end. So he had to really educate every customer. We had to grow very slow. And it really didn't start to take off for us until 1989 when we had the LR scare. And you know, then we had the 1990 Food Production Act. But you know, our delivery truck at that point was that U-Haul reefer on top. It wasn't refrigerated. It didn't have power steering. And you know, I got strong arms doing the deliveries. But the farm just really had to change. And you know, back to that what is a farm, when we were there on 18 different properties, every one of those fields was totally different soil types and different topographies and different microclimates. And it really, you know, what we knew how to do all of a sudden didn't necessarily work because we were in a different setting. So every time we'd get to a new field, we'd have to learn all this stuff again. And we'd have to adjust what we could plant and where we could plant it. And then when we got to our new farm, we bought a new farm, and our first farm was sandy soil. Our new farm was a heavier loam. So all of a sudden, we were really successful at growing cremshaws and honeydews and all sorts of exotic soft melons. We got to our new farm, we couldn't grow those crops necessarily. Our soils were too heavy, we had fungal diseases when we grew those crops. We couldn't grow nice potatoes at our new farm because we just didn't have nice shapes. They tasted great, but they didn't look great because our soils were heavy. So we really had to readjust and change that synthesis of who we were as a farm. And then in 2008, we made the decision to sell our business name. So we were sufficiently branded as a farm. That was always part of our marketing system, to brand ourselves and to be known to our customers. And to talk a little bit about what we did to do that we were able to actually sell our name. And we sold our name to one of our buyers and our equipment, and we kept our land, and they had a 5-year lease to farm it. And now this fall, they're moving to their own land, and we're getting our land back. So I haven't been actively farming for the last 5 years, and that was a big decision. You know, every year I told you we'd shake hands and quit for a week, but we weren't really quitting. But there was a point where we said, you know, we want to do other things with our lives. And we loved farming, and it's not so much that we were leaving farming, but we wanted to go to the next thing. I wanted to write, I wanted to talk, I wanted to kind of get out in the public more and talk about the things that I'd learned and share them. So that was a very big decision. And I'll bring into it some more as we talk along today. So that's enough history to start us off. So this whole concept of what is a farm and creating that synthesis for you is very important. And I like to talk about gross income per product unit because depending on what market you sell to, you're going to get different gross incomes per product unit. And this list here, wholesale to broker up to CSA, that list is relevant in my market where I'm selling. So I would get the lowest price per product unit if I sold to a wholesaler, and the highest if I sold to CSA, and up like that. That's how I wrote that list. It might be different in your market. Farmers markets might be a better market for you here. I don't really know what your farmers market situation is. In our community, there's way too many farmers, and it's really cutthroat, and it's a great place for beginners, not a great place for experienced farmers. So for us, roadside stand and wholesale to retailers was really kind of a sweet spot because it matched. It wasn't top dollar. We could have got higher dollars, maybe selling to a restaurant or to a CSA per product unit, but it matched who we were in the other ways, in that we had plenty of agricultural land. We owned 100 acres, and 75 was tillable, about 45 was in production, and then we could keep 1/3 always in a year of soil building, so we could really rotate our crops through our soil-built soils. And we were mechanized. We had plenty of equipment, so we didn't have to make top dollar per product unit. But if we had been a different type of farm with different types of soil, because of the types of soil we had, we could grow a lot of the really big selling crops like broccoli. We had 12 to 15 acres of broccoli, and we could sell every head of broccoli we could grow because it was a main item. If we had been a very small farm, we might have made very different choices. We might have gone to a market where we could get top dollar for every product unit. So I'm going to be talking some about those different markets and how to make sure you're in the right market. You get in the wrong market and you might not be successful. It might not be that there's anything wrong with your production system, but you might not be getting the right dollar for it or the right system to match up and really make it work for you. This list on the left, the value additions, branding, unit packaging, labeling, delivery, service, and quality. The delivery, service, and quality are actually value added. You know, you put something in a jar and label, you call it value added. How you treat your customer, the kind of quality you bring into your stores, that's value added too. And that's going to help set you aside from other growers in your market and really establish yourself and get a reputation that lasts. This was a survey that was done in Minnesota in 2007 where they asked experienced farmers who were already in these markets which marketing channel they preferred. And it was very interesting for me because it really matched my own experience, where the majority of them preferred wholesale to stores. And that's not going to be true for every market. We happen to have been building our local markets for local food now for about 30 years in our region. And so we've got our buyers in many stores, even in our mainstream grocery stores, to a point of good commitment where they're not expecting us to play the California price game and go up and down like a yo-yo every time the wind blows, but they pay us a steady local price. So for a lot of growers in our region, that has become their market of choice. And they said direct sales at the farm as their second choice. And farmers market really got a low score, and then CSAs. So it was interesting to me because it matched my own experience. And this doesn't mean that wholesale to retail stores is the best place for you to sell. It might not match what your farm is. But I want you to look at the different markets. You know, I'm asked to come in here and talk about wholesale, but I'm not going to tell people to wholesale because it has to be right for you for it to work. And then when you look at different markets, you know, each market is going to have different strengths and weaknesses. So the great thing about farmers markets is you can do some specialty crop, you can find your niche, it's great for if you're experimenting, if you have something and then you don't have it, it's not going to have the same negative consequence as it would have in a wholesale market where if you have something and then you don't have it, it's just really hard to keep your customers satisfied. So that can be an advantage of farmers markets. Agritourism can bring people to your business, and you can get value-added extra dollars sometimes for selling things other than product. You know, to sell it on a wholesale market, you're only going to make more money by growing more product. So agritourism can be a way of expanding your income per acre and adding value to that product. Restaurants can work for some people. We sold to restaurants until the 90s, and then we stopped. And they were great for us when we were smaller. We got to a size where they just weren't worth the trouble. They're going to be fussier. They often want 6 bunches of parsley instead of a whole case. So they'll pay more for it, and you can, you know, charge more, and you can give them service, and and get that relationship, and it can be a good market for some people. For us, it became not a great market. And they would want things like 100, pounds of something that produces the whole season for 1 week, and then they wouldn't want it again. So what am I going to do with it the rest of the week? And I had to have a way of managing that. So finding each of those components is really important as you look at these markets. At our roadside stand, it was such a great combination for us with our wholesale market, because we could send our number ones all went out wholesale. We could move some of our number twos through the roadside stand because we had that face-to-face relationship. We could adjust. If we were a little short, I might send it all out wholesale and buy product from my roadside stand and resell it. I did a fair amount of that because I would label it as to where it was from. It was really transparent. My customers at the stand wanted full service, so I would bring product in if I didn't have it, or products that I didn't produce, or processed products. It met my customers' needs, and then it brought us extra money for us, and it helped the farmers in our community by giving them a market. But above all, it really created relationship. And I'm going to talk a little later about what that relationship did for me when we were in trouble. When you create these relationships that are really direct with your customer, it creates a level of goodwill that really has a value far beyond any monetary gain that you're going to get selling your product. And that goodwill it's right there when you need it. You don't tap it every single day, and then if you have a problem or need some support from your community, you actually have created a community. And that comes from that face-to-face contact, really telling your story. These customers are hungry for your story. And it can be little simple things. All the magic you see on a farm, most of you know that ladybugs eat aphids, but the average customer doesn't. And so what seems like just everyday information to you is a story that they want to hear. So finding ways to tell that story is really great. So when we look at wholesale, for us it was very profitable. We made really good money in the wholesale market. Because we had volume and because we were mechanized, we could really capture that economy of scale. And it was okay that we received less per product unit because we had the volume and the economy of scale. And so the sales process was simplified. I would sell to one customer and reach 10,000 customers. That was simplified. Now that's actually also a disadvantage. Anything that's an advantage has also got its other side, its dark side. It meant that if I had a bad relationship with that one customer, well, if I lost them, I would lose tens of thousands of customers at one blow. So it's a strength and it's a weakness. I didn't need as much diversity. In the 70s and 80s, we would grow 50 to 100 different crops. Once by 2000, we were only growing 10 crops. And we were able to then do those 10 crops really, really well and very efficiently and very much of a viable. And as I already said, it was a great combination with direct sales. We didn't have to deal with competition in our market in the sense that we had a really well-developed market. But if you don't have a well-developed market, competition can be a really serious issue. And that sequencing skill is really crucial, because when you're in the wholesale market, your buyer really needs a steady product. It's got to just be on spot. So our goal was to come in as early as we could in the season and then have nonstop production all the way through the season, and then go and extend it as late as possible in the fall. I'm going to show you some of the ways we did that in a little while. That makes a huge difference in that wholesale market. If they know they can buy from you and count on you, they'll put your product in there and really promote it. But if you come in and then you go out and then you come in and go out, it's really hard to get back in. They get it in from somewhere else, and it's hard to step in, and they got to change their price signs, and then you start having food safety issues because your product is commingled with someone else. How do you trace that? So getting just really consistent. I would say that if you want to sell wholesale, that's the number one thing you need to be sure you're doing really well, is to just be really consistent. Well, that's so different than if you're selling to a CSA where your buyer wants a different box. They don't want the same box every week. You need to switch it up more. So it's a very different market and has really different demands. But this is what I think is the hardest thing about wholesale. I took this picture. I was backing up to this warehouse to deliver, and I got out of my truck. I was going to go to this door, and I couldn't because these tomatoes had fallen and spilled. So I had to stop. I went over and talked to the guy who was picking them up. I said, hey, what are you going to do with them? I thought he was going to give them to the food shop or something. Oh, no, we'll just put them back in the box. They're fine. They're just fine. He's putting them back in the box, and I was like, "You're going to ship those to a store?" He's like, "Yeah, they're fine." You have no control. Once you get to that loading dock and you take your pallet off your truck and they sign the invoice, it's theirs. And you have no control over it, but your name might be still on it. Our picture is above all of our produce. They might have handled it, but I went into the store and gave them my name and my picture and all this sorts of point of purchase materials. I don't want to be wholesaling to someone who I don't like the way they're handling a product. So this is one of the biggest challenges with wholesale, is make sure that your buyer is going to handle your product well and that it's going to look good. You go to all this trouble. I'm going to talk about post-harvest handling and how to get the best looking stuff out in the world. You can do all that, and if your buyer isn't handling it right and they're letting it get warm or they're letting it get old, your name is on it. It's going to affect your reputation. So make sure you have checked out your buyer if you're selling wholesale or to a store, and that they're handling your